Welcome back again. You are in the Rejuveron Age Better, Live Long Symposium. My name's Vivian Parry, and we're just coming up after a cracking opening session to our second element of our symposium. We're going to be talking about translational medicine, navigating the path from bench to bedside. Again, we have an absolutely outstanding selection of speakers. So let me introduce you to the first of those, whilst also reminding you that you can be asking questions. Do put them in the questions section rather than the chat session, if you would. So our first speaker is Professor Nir Barzilal, who's director of the Nathan Schock Center of Excellence in the Biology of Aging, which is the biggest center in the world studying the biology of aging. He also studies families of centenarians that have provided many genetic and biological insights on the protection mechanisms against aging, and several drugs are being based in part on those findings. Of particular significance to us here tonight, I suspect, he's leading Tame. Now, Tame, which stands for Targeting or Taming Aging with Metformin, is a multi-central study to prove the concept that multimorbidities of aging can be delayed in humans, and to change the US FDA indications to allow for next generation interventions. That's something I suspect we'll talk about a lot in this, about the regulatory landscapes and how we change that. He's also founder of COBAR, which is now a public company, and medical advisor for Life Biosciences. Neil, welcome.
Thank you very much, Vivian, and thank you for this effort that you're doing. It's really wonderful effort, and as you said, we're catching a wave here, and I hope we're on the tipping point. There's a lot that's happening, and certainly I just want to connect from the previous session and say, if you don't believe, you all know that there's biology of aging because you know who's old and who's young, but if you don't believe that this biology is driving aging, if you don't believe this biology can be targeted and that health span can be extended and age-related diseases can be delayed, then you're on the wrong flight, okay? or move to coach, whatever. Next slide, please. So knowing this as an opening statement, what are the challenges for us to go from, actually we went from hope to promise, but to realize this promise? Well, you know, usually if you have a disease, there are biological discoveries and you kind of develop pathways, and you form a biotech and pharmaceuticals, and you develop the drug, and the drug is targeting the diseases next. And sorry, somebody is moving this for me, so I'm not independent. Can you go on? Can you go on? Yeah, and in fact, we scientists are benefiting because drug companies want more mechanism to develop better drugs or combination of drugs, and there's a lot of money in the system and for us to research. However, next, the problem is that FDA doesn't recognize aging as a disease or as a preventable condition. And if that happens, next, if disease of aging are not recognized as something that we can prevent, then the healthcare providers don't need to pay for this treatment, okay? Because they're about their business plan. And of course, if the healthcare providers don't pay, then pharmaceuticals will not develop those other drugs, better drugs, combination of drugs, because they also need a plan. And so and when I say we are calling ourselves geroscientists. We, a bunch of geroscientists, thought of how can we go on and basically get an indication from the FDA that is similar to targeting aging or preventing aging, or as it happens, preventing a cluster of age-related disease. Next slide. So metformin is a drug that actually targets all the hallmarks of aging. And I want just to pause for a second and explain what confuses even us when we argue about that. Do I think metformin really targets all the hallmarks of aging? Well, not directly. But the point is, if you have a drug that takes an old cell or an old organ or an old body and make it young again, a lot of things are going to be improving. And that's why Brian always says, you know, it's the interaction, it's the fact that we don't need to target everyone in order to get an effect. We're affecting the other hallmarks of aging. And that's what metformin is doing. That's what sirtuins are doing. That's what rapamycin is doing. And we always say, hey, but it's doing this and that, and not only what we expect. Well, that's right. If you fix aging, that's what happened. Next. And please show all the four next ones. So metformin has been in use for more than 70 years. It was actually used initially to prevent malaria and flu and inflammatory disease when it was discovered that it lowers glucose in diabetes. And then, you know, it became an anti-diabetic drug. It is generic and cheap, and that's very important. We come to the FDA as scientists without the back of any pharmaceuticals for a drug that you can read anything you want to read about this drug in the FDA sites. Actually, we met with the FDA, we exchanged with the FDA, we basically never talked about metformin. We talked about what to do with it. Now, it happens that in different clinical studies and association studies, metformin happens to target different diseases. Okay, now, if you don't understand that aging is the common cause for those diseases, then you miss the point, and many do. Okay, many people think, well, you know, it just happened that metformin is this miracle drug that affects cognitive decline and cancer and diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And also it decreases mortality. Well, good luck with this thought. But that's not what we're here to do. Next slide. Tame is a study that, and you're right, Vivian, I offer taming aging because we called it Tame, but I was ruled out, and it's targeting aging with metformin. And the preliminary data for Tame is the following. And please go on and show the details. So it prevents diabetes in non-diabetics. It's preventing cardiovascular disease in diabetics. Association studies, 250 association studies show that people on metformin have much less cancers. Metformin delays cognitive decline and Alzheimer, even in non-diabetic. And it even lowers mortality. Next slide. So metformin is a really great tool to target aging. And I want just to spend a minute on this slide that is a study that can happen not in the United States, but outside. This was done in the UK, where you can go to the pharmacies and get information of new prescriptions. And through that, you can also follow things like mortality of the people who are using these drugs. And you have 4 lines there that are going down because it's people over the age of 60 and they die. And the blue line is people who have diabetes and are treated on sulfonylurea monotherapy, compared to the red group that don't have diabetes, but they are treated, you know, same demographic, same doctors, same pharmacies, but they don't have diabetes. So mortality of people with diabetes on sulfonylurea is pretty much twice as much as people without diabetes. But really the interesting thing is what happened to, in the green line, to 78,000 people on metformin compared to 78,000 people that are controlled, that don't have diabetes. And they have actually less mortality, okay? Now they have less mortality, significantly less mortality, although they have diabetes, the control doesn't have diabetes. They're more sick to begin with, and they are more obese to begin with. And yet they die less on metformin. So if you took everything I told you together, all those studies that shows that metformin affects specific diseases and also that it decreased mortality, you understand that we have pretty convincing preliminary data to go on. Next. So what we're doing with the Tame is we're taking elderly people, 3,000, on a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And this is very important to understand because this is a new concept. The primary outcome is a cluster of diseases that seemingly have no relationship between them, except, yes, aging. So we are really agnostic to what disease you're bringing to the study and which specific disease you're going to get. For every disease you're going to get the point. If your mother is diabetic and you're obese, you're going to get diabetes next. You'll get the point for that. So it's really moving the cluster or moving the health span with metformin. Very important. We have another part of the study that is supported with, so the primary outcome is called the FDA outcome because they need hard outcomes, but the NIA will support a biomarker effort. I think it was discussed before. Bjork, I think, said biomarkers are very important, not only to distinguish between biological age and chronological age, but to reflect that something is happening when you start treatment. And in fact, it's very important to establish those biomarkers here with this trial, but it's also very important because we cannot do phase 3 trial. That's a phase 3 trial. We cannot do a phase 3 trial for everything and spend $1 billion and be successful in 10% of them. We need in several weeks or months to get an idea whether the biomarkers are changing in order to build the phase 3 trial. Next. So, sorry, next. Okay, I'm sorry. I had slides that I worked on since recently, but let me stop here. I think I exceeded also my time allowance. Thank you.
Nir, thank you very much indeed. And I want to now move on to Andrea Meyer. Andrea, hello. And Professor Andrea Meyer is, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Ru Shu Seng Professor at the Department of Medicine at the National University of Singapore, conducting research on aging and clinical translation in humans. She's particularly focused on sarcopenia and clinical translation in humans. So she's conducted several observational and intervention studies, so very well suited then to be part of this particular session. She spent time as Professor of Aging at the VU University at Amsterdam, and in 2016 she joined the Royal Melbourne Hospital as Divisional Director of Medicine and Community Care and as Professional Fellow of Aged Care at the University of Melbourne. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you so much. So indeed, I'm a clinician scientist, and that's also how I tackle this 6 minutes, I would say. But I'm also tackling a little bit, making use of my experience being a hospital manager, which I did until recently. Because we really need to prevent the age-related diseases, and I would say that we really have to optimize function. We might not just prevent age-related diseases, but I think for a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old, it's very important that we know what the functional level is at this moment, and then use it as a top sporter to see, okay, how can we optimize it? So therewith, in 20, 30 years' time, we even might therewith prolong the healthy lifestyle even more. So we have to therewith fill a gap. So that gap is really coming from healthcare, which is quite reactive. We are talking about multimorbidity. I'm a geriatrician by training, but tend more to call me an internal medicine specialist, also in terms of prevention. And we really have to bring this into the clinical field, the health span and these kind of terminologies. On the one hand, on the other hand side, we are facing lots of academic studies, which are brilliant, really targeting aging and animal studies, showing that animals, flies, C. elegans, can live 3 times longer. And that we learn a lot from zebrafish, and knowing we share 70% of our genome with zebrafishes, I think we really now have to make the step, as, for example, Nir Barzilal is doing with his Tame study, to bring it into human beings, to really make the case that we can extend health span. And medicine, if I look from a head-on as internal medicine specialist, is based on a concept of we are identifying individuals, we are screening them, we are assessing them, we do the first interventions, we assess them again, we do adaptations in the assessments, and that's a little bit a circle. And I think that should be the basis, I call it, of longevity medicine. And this cycle of screening, assessment, intervention, and that should be lifetime, that approach, should be evidence-based. And I think that's very important. And I think we really have to make lots of efforts that that's evidence-based. And this evidence has to then, to be competitive also in the medical field, it has to be summarized in guidelines. And even if we do not have the evidence yet, we have to at least ask, I would say, experts, what should be the guide? And then, of course, that should be approved by medical societies if we really want to take us seriously. And then, of course, this will be updated, and that drives innovation and implementation and cost effectiveness, which is, I think, a very important point, because we don't know yet if it will be cost effective. Of course, there's lots of indications. So I would like to summarize the field of translational longevity medicine in 7 points we really have to target. And the first one is we need biomarkers to measure biological age. And that biomarker doesn't have to be per se sensitive to change if we just use it for risk stratification. Gray hair, for example, is a very good risk stratifier, not the best one. So we need better ones for risk stratification, because we might not want to target, or cannot in the first instance, target 100% of the population, because everybody here in the room is aging. The second thing is, which is very important, can also be used a little bit as risk stratifier. That's tracking human behavior, looking at physical activity, diet, sleep, and all doing that objectively, which can be done with our smartphones, etc. And we need that very good knowledge about extrinsic factors too. So not only in what kind of environment are you living in terms of your social behavior, but also what's the weather, what's the pollution, what's the noise, etc. Because that might interfere with our effect sizes of the interventions. And then, of course, we need biomarkers being sensitive to change, because we need that intermediate phenotype, as just alluded to, because we cannot wait for the hard outcomes 20 years later if we would intervene in a 30 or 40-year-old. And of course, we need the interventions, which is the fourth point. That's very important, a proven effect eventually, and an effect size which we could use to make good decisions together with our clients or with our patients, to really say, if you're doing this, that will reduce your risk of having age-related diseases in 20 years' time by this and this and this. So that's very important. And the cost effectiveness, of course, for public health is very important. And the one who is paying out of pocket, the value for money. So for clients who want ideas privately. We need, I think, trial networks, and this is not rocket science. So we need to gather our thoughts together and to make it happen, and to be able to recruit individuals in a much faster pace. And of course, this is only be possible if we educate individuals to really build a generation of physicians who can apply longevity medicine. And we cannot wait 10 years until we have lots of trials being positive, even if 90% are negative. But we have to start now, because it takes time until we can apply it in clinical practice. And of course, there is the regulatory part and hopefully, and the quality control, which we hopefully touch on in discussion. And this, all what I said, is not rocket science, because I do it as internal medicine specialist, if I do the head-on as endocrinologist or oncologist, because we are measuring glucose, we are titrating insulin, we are measuring glucose again, and it works or it doesn't work. And in the end, we get the patient doesn't get a bill, but we have arrangement with the health insurer and we get paid. And that's, I would say, the ultimate aim for longevity medicine. But we need the huge data sets, and we need the trials, and especially, which is very important. And I feel that our field is a little bit going into the wrong direction, that we need transparency. So we need to know where is data coming from, what kind of algorithms we use if we do it in academia. And I think there is sometimes a tension between the private businesses selling all these biological age markers versus the academic science. So as I said, no rocket science, evidence-based medicine principles, value for money, acceptable risk factors, risk profiles, and low side effects. And that's actually what we try to achieve at the Center for Health Longevity at NUS. And you already heard Brian Kennedy speaking. I just want to make one last point, and then I'm stopping, because in my point of view, longevity medicine will not make an impact if we don't have public health issues controlled. And with public health issues, I mean obesity, smoking, non-compliance with medication, etc. Because it might be that the lifestyle interventions might have a much better effect. We already know that if somebody does the good things in life, health span will roundabout roughly 10 years longer compared to the one who is not doing the good things. So what I really would urge our field is not only looking at mechanisms, etc., and implementing them, but having the dialogue a little bit in a broader space, not only with politicians, etc., but also with our colleagues out of the public health departments. Thanks.
Andrea, thank you so much. That was very comprehensive, very thoughtful overview. And I've added an additional range of specialties to go to our crack team of in aging and longevity, and that's health economists. By the way, if you ever want your children to keep you in your old age, either make them a bioinformatician or preferably a health economist. They are as rare as hen's teeth and paid fortunes. So let's come now to our last speaker, who's Dr. Stephen Halliwell, who's Vice President of Drug Discovery at Rejuveron Life Sciences. He's got nearly 2 decades of experience, all stages of the preclinical pipeline, a track record of innovative high complexity phenotypic screening approaches for both target and lead identification using yeast, cell lines, patient-derived cells, stem cells, differentiating neurons. He's been there, he's done it, ladies and gentlemen. Stephen, tell us, what's Rejuveron's approach?
Thank you very much, Vivian. Nice to see you again. Yes, so I'm very humbled to be with such a group of very high-profile academic specialists. So this is excellent. So thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. I represent, of course, Rejuveron in this session. So I represent the commercial interests of the aging space. And I think that it's very clear that we all need the help of each other to move the bar on healthy aging therapies and interventions and behavior. And so I'm very appreciative of the efforts of folks like Nir and Andrea in pushing the limits of trials using multi-morbidity markers and frailty markers, which are not necessarily accepted by the FDA in their entirety, to educate people about how we could do this kind of intervention. So at Rejuveron, we have the vision to drive the production of therapies that will one day be taken by everybody as they approach a certain age, in a preventive mode, if you like, really, in the distant future, but at the very least, at the very first signs of diseases of aging. So that's where we are on the vision. In reality, at the beginning of our journey, we have to be slightly more pragmatic some of the time and timely in the way we achieve our human clinical trial results. And you've heard already about the fact that the regulatory authorities don't recognize aging as a disease. You know, we can only wonder why and continue to educate all the relevant people whenever we have the opportunity at regulatory meetings. But in principle, the way to attack aging diseases today with therapies that we're now creating based upon the incredible discoveries that have occurred over the last 2-3 decades, but primarily in the last decade, I would say, is that one has to look at a disease where there is a current unmet medical need, where the disease etiology, the disease mechanism is related to the biological processes or pathways that we know also go wrong in all of us as we age otherwise healthily. Okay, and so there are multiple indications or diseases that have this criteria, and so we would aim to develop therapies that attack biological processes of aging that we know should have an effect in these diseases of aging, so that we can achieve what we call that first POC, proof of concept. So we go into humans, we make sure we've assessed safety, obviously, and that we're taking those safe drugs or safe at that level of the trial into a phase 2A proof of concept trial, where we see that the drug is doing the thing that we expected it to do at the molecular level. So we know it's working on the pathway we designed it to work on, and we see that effect is having an effect on the outcome for the patient. That's the core of what we need to do to achieve that moment in time when our future therapy starts to look attractive also from the commercial perspective, because we eventually need to raise more money to drive expansion trials and take those therapies into potentially less severe or more complex diseases, where that biological process is going wrong, along with other things going wrong, with the hope that we can stave off the onset of those diseases as well. And so there are various flavors and ways to attack that sort of situation. And so the easiest one is, as people here have been doing, is to take known drugs where there's enormous amounts of safety data, so there's no question of a safety issue, and drive them into the clinic for diseases of unmet need. And many people are doing this very successfully. Obviously, we need to take drugs for which we have, some protection on that discovery, so that we're able to commercialize it, to make money, to keep doing the next trial and the next trial and develop our next therapy and so on. So we need to take novel discoveries and turn them into therapies to take into these stepping stone indications to achieve POCs. At the same time, it is possible, and we should be considering, and I know that Brian and others are considering, to take more than one drug at once into trials. Combinations of known drugs that have anticipated or unanticipated effects are also of great merit. And in reality, if you understand, or you've heard us mention the hallmarks of aging or the pillars of aging, there are 6 or 7 or 9 or 13 or 14, depending who you ask. But basically, aging is a complex piece of biology, and maybe we need to be attacking 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them at once with very discrete therapies to attack the problem in toto. Although metformin seems to have a remarkable effect here, I have to say. And so it's important for us to think about these kinds of things to move our therapies through the clinical pipeline. An alternative approach, or a different approach, is to consider genetic diseases. These may not occur in elderly people. There may even be a pediatric indication. And the idea here is that there are certain genetic diseases where biological pathways that we know contribute to our aging when we're otherwise healthy are simply very much more damaged or completely defective in these unfortunate, often very unfortunate children, because many of these diseases end up being terminal early, which is very, very distressing. But if we have a molecule that reverses that defective mechanism in those patients, we can achieve a very quick and clean proof of concept. I would hope that we're successful, because these are also patient populations with high unmet need. There are very few cures for these people. That tells us our drug is safe, because we'll be collecting that data, and it tells us it's working, because we'll be able to see there'll be biomarkers, endpoints for these diseases that we can see working. As we do all these so-called proof of concept trials in diseases of aging, or in pediatric genetic diseases that link up to biological mechanisms of aging, we aim, or we should be aiming, to also collect as much other data as we can to inform on these other so-called aging biomarkers. And this is where the academic groups pushing the frailty indexes and the multimorbidities, pushing them as far as they can go in terms of regulatory acceptance, are also very important. And in doing so, we would aim to take all of our therapies from our POC into phase 3 trials for those indications, but also into expansion trials for people who are healthy, otherwise healthy, but simply aging, to achieve the true vision of Rejuveron. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. So let me ask a general question, which actually has to do with COVID. Nir, what we saw in COVID is we saw a very rapid collaboration between industry and academia. And we also saw a number of platform trials, recovery being the most notable of those, where patients were randomized to have one of many, well, I think there were half a dozen therapies in the beginning, to see whether they worked or didn't work. And is that a kind of approach which might work in aging?
Well, first of all, let's face the facts here. If you were over the age of 80, you had 200-fold chances of dying from COVID than if you did not. Okay, so COVID is an aging disease. If we could have prevented this death, we wouldn't have maybe to close the world. 9 studies around the world, association studies, okay, not clinical studies, have showed that people on metformin had less hospitalization and mortality was decreased to up to 2/3, 68% less mortality. Connecting between COVID, aging, and gerotherapeutics. But even more exciting, John Manick has led an NIH study, a small study, where they used the rapalog, an analog of rapamycin, in old age home. And the results are not published, but she actually presented that. So I'm just saying what I heard from her, that the people who were in this rapamycin in old age home had no hospitalization and no death, while 40% of the people who got the placebo had, and maybe I'm not saying, I think it's maybe infection, hospitalization, and death, all of them. So yes, those clinical studies of using gerotherapeutics have been really exemplified in the COVID case. And yeah, I think it should come from the aging perspective, because those are the people who are dying and hospitalized.
But is that whole concept of platform trials and randomization? But I wonder how far this is going down the road, which has been explored before, but came to a kind of grinding halt, is the kind of polypill approach to aging. You will remember that this was an idea to have very small amounts of aspirin and metformin and all the rest all put together in a pill, which you'd get dispensed once you were 40. Is that approach a possibility?
I was in this think tank that was talking about statins in the water. Okay, but by the way, I was consulting years before Andrea got there to the Singapore government. And they wanted to talk to me. I said, give me questions. And I said, should we put metformin in the water? Okay, so this idea has been there, and the polypill has been discussed, and it's the doctors that really objected that, not the big picture people, not the epidemiologists. The doctors, no, I need to look at liver function, I need to do this, and I need to do that, as if it's all bad. My compromise, and I'd like Andrea to actually come in, but my compromise is maybe not immediately, but in the next stage, when we show that we can intervene with aging, move it to general practitioner. Actually, don't get the internist involved. Don't need the endocrinologist away. Just move it to the general practitioner, maybe to the nurse practitioner, and check out. Are you on metformin or whatever is your favorite drug? And probably the multi-pill will be a problem. I want to say something else before I let Andrea. You guys have to understand, I'm a biologist, okay? But I'm also a clinician. First day in medical school is do no harm, right? So we become conservative. Second day, there's no always and there was no never, right? There's trade-offs in medicine too. So we're confused, we're conservative and confused. I'm saying the people in the FDA and the other regulatory, they went just to those 2 days of medical school because you cannot understand how 5 billion vaccines are giving in the world and they don't get the safety approved already, right? So this is part of what we're dealing, a very big conservatism, even in the midst of epidemic that could have really been prevented so much more or a year later by those vaccines.
Andrea, your response to that. What about platform trials and randomization, you know, handing it out at GPs, getting really a slew of data?
So there are a couple of questions within that one question. So first of all, I would just like to make a remark that COVID really helped to build consortia very rapidly, and we're just working together and we get the trials done. So it seems that we can do it. So that's very good. Then the question about polypills, etc. I think I would be a little bit more careful than Nir is. Because in 10 years' time, maybe 5 years' time, we absolutely will have a polypill because we are knowing what pill is doing what and what medication and how much doses we need. What we should, I think, prevent is that we ending up, as we ended up in geriatrics, giving lots of medications, lots of interactions, and we don't know what's happening anymore. So that should not occur in the field of longevity medicine, because we need the evidence first. And I would say that we are not just talking about medication, and we are also designing the trials now to give 2 or 3 medications. But we also could consider to really optimize nutritional inputs, for example, vitamin D and vitamin B12 and 6, etc. And therewith optimize the function and the health and pathways of individuals. And then, of course, the biomarkers kick in again, that we can really, if we are fine-tuning, that we know what we are fine-tuning and can react quite immediately on the changes. And we can also react on the changes if somebody is going to be hit with COVID or with influenza, to fine-tune again, to really help out the body with that fine-tuning. And then, of course, once we have that, and hopefully we will have that in 5 years' time. So Nir, please go ahead with your trial. I think then it's another question of implementation, who's going to do it, who's going to pay, etc. And if it's a GP, I wouldn't care at all. Once we have the evidence, we just have to make sure that we already have the platform of physicians who can apply it. And as I said in my introduction, let's keep it evidence-based as much as possible. I'm very happy to implement something, but if we are implementing it, let's track our individuals who are already taking, for example, drugs, to learn from it while doing the bigger RCTs.
Is the issue here in terms of translation and the problems with regulators partly that actually you want to call it anti-aging, but actually if you called it for better health, or you didn't call it longevity or aging, it was really more about improved health rather than longevity. Would that soften the approach? Do you think there's a feeling about aging still within the FDA, who, as you say, Nir, did just the 2 days of medical school, that actually somehow we shouldn't be fighting against aging, somehow it's not the right thing to do?
So this is a great question, and it brings us to this thing that we discussed before: is aging a disease? And in my mind, aging is a disease, okay? If it drives the diseases, it can be a disease itself. However, if you ask elderly, they don't want to be called sick. And what if in 65, when they're 65, they're not sick, you call them aging? And look what happens with COVID. You put them on islands, you isolated them. There was nothing good that coming from calling them old. The AARP, the retirement organization, doesn't want to call aging a disease. The American Federation of Aging Research doesn't want to call aging a disease. The FDA doesn't want to call aging a disease. And what I've discovered that, there's two parts. First, we want the clients to be with us, right? We don't want to annoy them. But second, from the FDA perspective, we didn't have to call aging a disease. In fact, I don't think the FDA really believes that we target aging, but they say, look, if you show us that one pill can decrease a whole complex of disease, we're okay with it. And I think they'll get to their senses when they'll see the data, when with time they'll get it. But I think we have to be careful here of how we modulate it. And I would say, look, when I came to the field, I said, I'm doing aging research, and people were turned off. But I was actually looking at centenarians and was looking for longevity genes. So I said longevity. When you tell people longevity, they assume that they get the disease and now they live 40 years longer with the disease, okay? So then I went to health span. And in true, what we're doing with the biology, when we target aging, we increase health span and we increase longevity and in different proportions. So that's how I'm thinking about that.
So Stephen, maybe it is a problem about the vernacular that we should be not thinking about aging, that we should be thinking about just simply calling it extending health span, and actually a lot of the problems might melt away. Of course, we still need all the right biomarkers and we can't wait for 20 years for a result, but maybe that would help.
It certainly would. There's going to be a challenge to make the regulatory authorities think in reverse. I think we all accept that, because the point is that, of course, any novel therapy the kind of things we're working on that really get to the latest discoveries, there's no safety data. And of course, this ridiculous or not thing at the thank you for my medical school training, by the way. I've done it now 2 days. First do no harm is a problem, because you have to, at the population level, you have to take some risks to see if it works. And that's why we do very well regulated human trials. There's a risk. I think that the other part of solving that problem so that the FDA can feel comfortable with that is that you have to come up with incredible amounts of data in the pre-existing population to actually find prognostic markers that say, okay, when you're 40, you go for a blood test. You're totally healthy. You're 40. You're running half marathons and you go skiing and whatever. And you take a blood test, and 5 different things have changed off the baseline, and we know so much. Okay, you're already showing signs of lung fibrosis, and they're like, what? No, I'm perfectly healthy. I run marathons. I run up Everest. It's fine. And they say, no, this biomarker is so good, we know it, and we have an extremely safe drug that you should start taking now, and it will stave it off from. You're going to get it when you're 60, from 55 to 65, but if you take this, your chance of having it is extended 10 years, right? Or whatever, but you've got a 1 in 1,000 chance of kidney failure in between times. Where do you, that gets complicated, right? But I think we need to, the gentleman offering the billions of dollars start doing enormous amounts of real world data omics to find prognostic biomarkers and diagnostic biomarkers, so that we know even before you're sick that you're going to get sick, and so that you can take the healthy pills that will be developing in the next decade.
Stephen, I'm going to rain on your parade a bit here, because what happens with statins? Now, the gentleman in the audience will know that what happens is that when you get to 40, you wear a black polo neck, you buy a fast sports car, and you take a mistress. Probably in that order, and when somebody comes along and says, sir, you need to take a statin because your blood pressure is, you do not take your statin, and you do not take your statin because taking it, and it's a lifetime medication then, really reverses what you think about yourself in your black polo neck in your fast sports car, and people don't take the drugs. So it's very difficult to get people to take things where they can't see an immediate benefit and may actually perceive it to be a marker that they are old when they are fighting against it, and would say categorically that they're not. Andrea, am I speaking the truth there?
Yes and no. Look, health behavior is always a very difficult topic, I must say, and especially if there are sex differences, it seems. But look, everything what's being done with preventative health is difficult because you will have it in 20 or 30 years' time. That's the first thing. So you don't feel the individual urgency. Secondly, which is very important, if you are sick at the age of 60 or 70, the healthcare system will be there and help you. So there was also no urgency to do something in terms of prevention because there is a safety net. If we compare our human body, and please, I take that quite seriously, but if our human body is something like we're using as we do our car, and you just mentioned that car, so that's a very nice example, and we are caring for that car, and every 6 months or every year, we are going for a maintenance of that car, and we are paying for it. Because why do we pay for it? Because otherwise the insurance will not pay. So in that analogy, I think, but this is a huge topic. We need to think differently of what and how we could stimulate middle-aged individuals to actually do something about prevention. And that might also be partly financial, to gain more health span in the end, because otherwise we will not change the world. We are changing the world at the moment, especially in the private businesses, for people at the age of 40 to 60 or 70 who are looking for use, who have money.
And who are probably healthier than most others at the same time.
Absolutely, and there's a huge bias in terms of socioeconomic status, of education, etc. So, but we will not reach, and that's what I try to actually to say, is that we won't reach the public health state. So we will reach individuals, but we don't make a difference. And I think that's a political challenge, independent of the and
so it's really interesting. We're discovering here that the translational element is not just about regulators. There's also a societal and there's a political element. And Nick Barbe, who's coming back saying statins, I believe, are well accepted to keep people young by preventing serious sequelae. So I don't agree with Vivian's line of thought. I would just go and look at I would look in the bedside drawers of men who've been given statins. I guarantee you'll find a lot of unopened packets near.
But we have data about it. It's 50% is not being taken. So yeah. we tested that, and we did all the statins straight after T's. So it's proven 50% take it.
But Vivian, there's something that hasn't been tested. Look, you're right. You can look at our audience, and you don't know who has high cholesterol. You don't know who has diabetes. You don't know who has hypertension. But people know who's old and who's young, and we never use that as a marketing tool, okay? Aging or longevity is a marketing tool, and we don't know if we cannot do better, okay? Because that's something that they can see, okay? The aging is something that they can see, and we've never said this drug will prevent aging. And I think it can have, if we market it right, we can have more participation.
Yeah. And I like that, sorry, to add something on it, I like that measuring, because what we're doing from birth, if somebody is pregnant, everything will be measured. If the child is born, everything will be measured. Everybody says, yes, there's a gaining of weight, etc. And we are stopped doing that at the age of 6 or the age of 10, when we the last time measuring height. So what we should actually do is tracking health over the life course, that we also then can identify the ones who have a little bit a higher risk of a higher biological age at the age of 20, 25, etc. And if the maximum of the capacity is really being there. So I think tracking and that in the analogy of cars, that regular checkup, if we have the right biomarkers, will be very important.
And actually, there is some ability to have a look at some of these big cohorts. I mean, I'm thinking of UK Biobank, for instance,
Yep.
Or the one that is coming up in the UK, Our Future Health, and which is specifically aimed at preventive health, to try and see whether we can, again, and I'm talking about the word randomization, randomize people to have one approach or another. Walter Crumpton saying, part of the reason people don't tolerate anti-aging pills because they're swamped with sophisticated marketing that overwhelms science. Walter Crumpton, you are a cynical man. But we welcome your comments all the same. Stephen.
Just to go back to this point again, in a private healthcare system where people pay a premium every month, are the insurance companies the middlemen? Is there a way, if you do more checkups, you pay less premium, even if you're healthy or not healthy? There has to be a way to drive it. And in the public sector driven systems, the GP would take blood every 5 years. Just, however the system is funded, there must be ways to incentivize the individual or the system to collect the data. Right. And
indeed, there is in many health systems to do that, and you'll see a lot of the private health insurance, reducing premiums if you join a gym and all those kind of things. But Stephen, we haven't solved your central problem, or indeed Nir's central problem of the FDA and other regulators. How do you think that we could undo that logjam? Because it really is a central problem in translation. Nir, you want to wave a magic wand. What would you do?
No, I think the whole Tame idea is to show them, put in their face. Of course, the study has to succeed, but to put in their face. And this is a template for the industry, right? It's not only about metformin, it's what do you do with the next drug? And it actually takes less to develop because I need 3,000 people. In order to have a drug that approved for diabetes, you need at least 12,000 people. So I think you have to drive it in the face. Look, I think that what the world needs is the change that the world needs is, okay, you do a phase 1, phase 2 trial, and then put it all on phase 4. In other words, why don't you let the company sell the drug? And there's sophisticated ways of seeing what happens to people on this drug or not on the drug, and gain safety, gain more information, and maybe have a final approval in 5 years, but allow the drugs to be cheaper, allow the drugs to be out there now, especially in aging when you want them. And maybe that's a creative way to think of what we should do.
Stephen, I'm going to leave the last word with you because we've reached the end of our time. Right. I'm giving you a magic wand and the regulators all locked in a darkened room. What would you do?
Oh, crikey, locked in a darkened room. Do I have the key to the door? It's a difficult one, right? It's also a politically loaded question. I think the big challenge is making the whole ecosystem realize that if you invest enough money now in the right drugs, and you have to generate the safety data. I think Nir's idea is fantastic. Get your phase 2A POC in 60 people and then launch it to the world. But you have to have done some kind of medium, long-term tox studies in a very controlled environment to risk the entire population, because somebody will die in that phase 4 phase, and the newspapers will be full of the person dying, when statistically they would have died anyway, and it's nothing to do with the drug. And then the small negative downside is rather much larger than its actual effect in the system. So a health economist will understand that, but there's a reputation loss for academic investigators, and there's a reputation loss and a financial loss for commercially driven operations that we probably wouldn't run that risk either without doing a bigger trial to get safety and efficacy data. So it's not that simple either. You'd have to err on the side of caution. I think if the mechanism of the drug and the safety factors have been known for years, as in Nir's case, Absolutely. And somehow can you prescribe it and have people report on an app, you know, oh, did you have diarrhea today? No. Yes. Did you get a headache? No, and so on. You could actually do your phase 4 reporting really, really well with an app.
Well, I think I'm going to stop you there, Stephen. It's been a very good debate. Thank you to all three of you. Nick Barbet, I'm very delighted to know that you take your antihypertensives and you have a sports car. And we're going to be back at 5, you're in a different time zone. We're going to be back on the hour for our next session, which is cutting edge science to control aging. Thank you to our participants, and thank you all for contributing so much to the discussion. Bye for the moment.